Hello, everyone. Welcome to BizTalks Unplugged, Season 2, Episode 10, the finale of our series, where we open the floor for unrestricted and unscripted dialogues for curious business minds. Our today's guest needs no introduction, and as such, we'll begin our narrative with a little pause, a little break, and a little reflection. Season 2 began with Mr. B.S. Nagesh discussing institutions building in modern retail. And today, we conclude the season by exploring how industrial ecosystems are being reimagined for the future. Our guest is Mr. Abhimanyu Prakash. He is the Chief Executive Officer and the Director at AL Circle and represents a new generation of entrepreneurs creating digital infrastructure around critical industries. This conversation explores not merely a metal, a commodity, but the future architecture of industrial value creation. Thank you, sir. It's an absolute honor to have you with us today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Srijan, for inviting me to be part of this closing session. And again, huge congratulations to you and the team for putting this interesting series of dialogues together so far.
Yeah, and it has been great in many ways, I would say. So our first segment begins with the theme of the idea that from architecture to the industrial ecosystem building. And one thing we have always wondered that any individual who enters into a line of business gets to have a certain degree of experience, a certain level of knowledge of the industry itself. And you specifically coming from an industrially rich and not just industrially but culturally rich family as well. Yet you study the architecture before entering the aluminum ecosystem. What intellectual connections exist between designing physical spaces and designing industrial ecosystems that you really think about?
That's a great question, Srijan, and thanks for asking me that. It's a question I often ask myself as well. You know, how did I traverse this journey? And I'd like to begin a little bit back in the day when I was a little less than 10 years old. And thanks to my culturally forward upbringing and family, I had the opportunity to travel to Europe for the first time. And I remember spending about 2 weeks in Italy and um, coming back absolutely gobsmacked by the level of innovation that happened in the historical times. And, you know, we don't really tie the words history and innovation together, but innovation isn't what we are just doing today. Innovation is what happened centuries back as well. And I think the works of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, all the way from architecture to science to astronomy, kind of just took me as a child. And I am told by my friends that I came back as a 10-year-old from this vacation. And at school, I went around announcing to everyone, I'm going to become an architect one day. Um, and, you know, despite being a potential fifth generation entrepreneur in my family lineage of businessmen, I was always given the freedom to choose education, choose career choices that felt true to me. As long as I was being a responsible citizen to my country, as long as I was being a contributing member to my family. And with that, I kind of finished school and went into several years of an architecture education. I went ahead and then did my master's in urban design at Columbia University in New York and continued to work in that space for many, many years. Even today, a part of me continues to advise and strategically support work in that space. And what kind of brings that bridge between my two areas of work is two key aspects. Number one is that at the end of the day, you're dealing with people. Whether you're building spaces for people or businesses for people, it is keeping people at the center. And I think that degree in architecture and urban design truly taught me what it meant to keep a people first approach, what it meant to design around the human being, around the human psyche, around human habits and causes. And if you think about a digital business, even a digital business is trying to create a human habit. It is trying to transfer what people had been doing manually into a digital first approach, which we're doing at Al Circle for the aluminium industry. So I think the first core connect for me has been a people centered approach to thinking, to applying that thought into action and strategy to build the business. And the second is the interconnectedness of systems. And here I give a lot of credit to my work at the Global Designing Cities Initiative, where I was part of for several years, where I've always been taught to work with multiple systems working together, whether it was transport and government and private stakeholders and city agencies and decision makers, to now at Al Circle, again looking at different systems, right? I'm looking at technology as a lens, I'm looking at marketing as a lens, I'm looking at human resources as a lens. And it's about being able to connect the dots and find synergy between those. And I think there is no better profession, I can say this by experience, than architecture and urban design, which can truly prepare you to make sure that the systems connect with each other, because you can't build a building in isolation, right? You can't build the structure and later say, oh, now let's do the plumbing. You have to think the plumbing from the get-go. You have to think of the electricals from the get-go. And I think that's what makes building the business of Al Circle so exciting, because I'm able to bring this inherent knowledge of thinking through all the different lenses going forward.
One important thing among your recent statements, Abhimanyu, has been this, that you are having a people-centric approach while also building a digital infrastructure. When we talk about digital infrastructure, we certainly talk about the emerging technologies, the introduction of AI, the robotics as well. With those coming into picture, how do you still maintain this, this people-centric approach, and how do you, sort of keep the employees of the L Circle not in the state of fear that the axe might someday fall on them?
That's such a relevant question. And, right now, having just completed the PMS cycle, the performance management cycle for the organization this April, it was an emerging conversation which we had with a lot of the teams. And I think there are a few aspects to be mindful of this, particularly as the leader of any organization, whether you're running a digital business or not, because even if you're running a manual business, digital tools are starting to creep into all our operational activities as we go ahead. I think the number one is upskilling your team. How do you upskill your team to not be just doing the routine tasks, but to actually start leveraging technology and AI based tools to improve their work and grow to the next level of strategic thinking? So I think one of the pieces we're doing at Al Circle is starting to invest more in training for our team members so that their operational tasks can be automated and they can start developing the tools and the acumen to apply themselves and their time to more strategic decision-making tasks and use the digital tools to their advantage. That's one aspect to be very focused on, which is upskilling of the existing team. The second aspect is conscious hiring, right? Now, when we are hiring, the hiring plans that we made last year did take a little bit of a shift at the beginning of this financial year, because we identified what were some of the roles we thought we needed human resources for, but can we bring human resources at more intermediary and leadership levels where we need more thought-based decision making? And can we build tools or models which can automate the operational task? So here you're almost preventing this hiring in itself, which may be operational for today, and you may risk their future in the organization. So why not be conscious in hiring itself? And then number three is just a general sense of understanding that I think what human beings can bring cannot be replaced by technology. I've come into this podcast with a 45 minutes meeting, which was titled by my team on the calendar Critical Strategy Decision. Now, this critical strategy decision was something they could not be running through Claude. They all have Claude subscriptions and they could have run through it. But it was something that we needed to come in person to discuss, debate, bring my experience of working with people in, say, China and Vietnam, bring my colleagues' experience of working with people in USA and Mexico, and bringing that kind of human understanding to taking the decisions that we are taking today. Yes, the data, the tools are all important, but I think there is something very, very core to human understanding, which is still something that we humans do best.
Perfect, sir. Sir, one more question that you have said that there is a human touch as well. We have seen that the 20th century is defined by the oil, and now it's the 21st century, which is going to be defined by the digital economy. So, how do you think that aluminum is going to fit into that, and what's going to be future of this commodity metal?
A great segue into what we're doing, Akash. And I think one of the things which got me excited to make this transition from the world of urban design to um, aluminium was this common thread of sustainability. Architecture, urban design, the cities that we're building have all been pressurized today, and we're trying to build more solutions which are sustainable. And I think aluminium is an answer to a lot of that when we talk about sustainability. I think the first piece where it fits in today's world is that it is the only 100% recyclable metal available to mankind, right? So you lose a little bit of iron because of oxidation, you lose several other metals, but aluminum can actually be recycled infinitely to keep reusing its properties in different forms, different formats, different applications. The second place where it becomes very key in today's economy, which is facing the challenge of climate, which is facing the challenge of uncontrolled urbanization, is that it is at the center of helping other industries go green. And I'll give you a few examples. Just look at your beverage companies, right? We know that FMCG companies are at an all-time high with people buying those products, and they continue to grow. That's not reducing. The number of companies, particularly in the beverage spaces, in the home lifestyle good spaces, are transitioning to aluminium because aluminium is more lightweight, it's more environmentally friendly. So, think about your Coke cans going from plastic PET bottles to aluminium cans and several other applications like that. Look at your automobiles today. With the advent of EVs,
The-
aluminium is replacing steel in cars, and the life cycle emissions of an aluminium car versus a steel car go down by 20 times, Akash, only because aluminium is so lightweight and it reduces the fuel consumption in the cars. And that is the same mechanism why even things like buses and railways are starting to shift to aluminium. Companies like Hindalco, Vedanta here in India are starting to build the first railway wagons out of aluminium because they reduce the load and they can carry more freight with lower emissions. And then just finally, energy transition. We're all talking about energy transition, and aluminium is probably one of the most widely used mechanisms. We talk about rare earth minerals as the big commodity that the world's trying to regionalize, but aluminium is equally as important. When you look at solar infrastructure, 85% of a solar panel is made out of aluminium. Wind turbines, water turbines, they're starting to be made out of aluminium alloys. Aluminium is also replacing copper in a lot of cabling and wiring today. Even the battery storage, the containers are made out of aluminium, right? So I think aluminium is front and center in today's economy. And when we talk about data centers and AI and digital tools, they run on one thing, which is energy. And I think aluminium is such a critical component to making that energy available to these data centers that I think aluminium here to stay, to grow, and to activate a lot of these industries going forward.
Perfect, sir. And sir, while you're mentioning that your work in China and Vietnam as well, I just want to ask, in the Indian context, do you see any threat to the Indian labor market or something like that? Because they have the robot, China have the now come toward the robotics. Vietnam have very cheap labor and very friendly laws for the cheap labor as well. So do you think that India have something threatened to be means a job market?
I don't think it's about a threat. I think it's about taking calculated decisions. And I think, our government has been working very strategically to protect our manufacturing environment. We have seen a lot of imports in the past of very low cost products coming in from several neighboring countries and others flooding our markets. And we can't completely eliminate that because see we have to understand two pieces over here, Akash. One, we're still an emerging economy. We still have a very large population which cannot afford a lot of the luxuries at very high cost. That income disparity exists. Until we can build that infrastructure to provide a lot of goods at very, very low cost or optimal cost, we will need to import a lot of those daily tools and services. Um, that being said, I think a lot of government schemes, a lot of incentives, coupled with a lot of private investment, has seen a huge uptick in manufacturing coming in. And manufacturing both for the domestic consumption as well as for export. And I think that is what is going to keep the job markets evolving going forward. So, just look at Apple, one of the companies which has always been in the news for having a lot of their manufacturing in China, but also setting up a lot of manufacturing now in India. A lot of auto manufacturers are doing the same. So I think the right set of government incentives, the right state infrastructure, which comes from power, which comes from utilities, which comes from infrastructure and land and other mechanisms that allow for industry, a combination of private investment and foreign investment, and the right education system, I think will all be key ingredients in making sure that we can protect our people, protect their jobs, and not risk them and kind of grow in a sustainable way. We have to realize we're also a very, very large economy. So there are no magic wands that can change the situation overnight. But I think over time, with concerted efforts, we will definitely see heading in the right direction.
So, Manu, the final line that you've used over time and considered efforts, we can, look at change, is something sort of that relates to my next query in itself. Now, AL Circle itself is not an aluminum producing company, and its shares are not listed on the stock market. Instead, in my view, and in the view of the Indian business industry, it is a prominent digital media knowledge platform and a B2B marketplace for the global aluminum industry. Now, right now, as of today, the Vedanta Limited sort of holds around 46 to 48% aluminum share of the market. The Hindalco goes around 39%, and then there's the Nalco, the government body that is there as a premier knowledge and B2B platform rather than a primary producer. This is a question to you as the CEO. How does AL Circle plan to leverage its global data assets to help the Indian aluminum majors like Vedanta, Hindalco, and Nalco, etc., to navigate the volatile LME pricing and transition towards a certified green aluminum?
That's a loaded answer, and I can only speak on behalf of what we can do.
Yes.
Of course, the eventual investments and decisions will rest on the mega producers who we work with. But I think I'd like to give the audience a little bit of a background context to your question by just stating that the primary aluminum production in its first form requires very high intensive energy. And India, like many other countries in this part of the world, continues to be thermal powered, which is coal powered. And I think there's a huge demand in the industry globally to start producing more green aluminium. So aluminium which reduces emissions, aluminium where the power source is probably renewable energy. Having said that, I think this is again a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, Srijan, where I don't think the answer to transitioning to green aluminium lies in front of us, because India still today does not have access to hydropower, which is powering a lot of other green aluminium plants, which you see in different parts of the world. So whether it be in Norway, whether it be in China, Russia, a lot of the green metal is powered by hydropower. And we don't have that kind of natural resources in our country to power large facilities. When it comes to solar and wind, we know that energy storage is a big challenge that is faced by the industry. And I think those challenges are being worked upon. But I think what Circle does uniquely is three pieces to bring to not just the Indian industry, but actually our global players. The first is timely news, information, and business insights. So we have a market research and data intelligence team which is constantly studying not just the Indian market, but global markets to understand what are the shifts happening. Shift in technology, shift in production styles, in energy mixes, and what are the costs. And with that, we are able to bring insight to large companies like Hindalco, Vedanta, and others on what are technologies which can help starting to reduce emissions, starting to reduce scope one emissions at the plant itself. You know, whether it be heat recovery technologies, whether it be pot controller technologies, or whether it be just sensors which help optimize the pot rooms for these. So we have a lot of these kind of technology players which use Circle as their marketing platform to promote these to the Indian players and globally. The second thing which our team does is with our B2B marketplace, we're also trying and bringing more resources, more raw materials, equipment, and others at people's fingertips for the Indian industry and globally. Now, what that happens is it reduces a lot of the other kind of carbon footprint heavy exercises that people are doing, you know, multiple trips, trying to find vendors. You can now find them at your desktop on your mobile phone through the Circle app. And that allows you to at least start a lot of those conversations digitally and discover what those companies can bring to your forefront. And then the last piece, which we support with, is also pricing and selling tools, right? And that's which helps navigate the LME pricing that you were talking about, Srijan, which has been skyrocketing thanks to the war, unfortunately. And, you know, Circle stands beside all the Middle Eastern smelters who've been affected and their production has gone down because of this, is that we're constantly tracking price trends and sharing that with the market. We are also supporting with metal sales and procurement contracts from time to time through our intelligence to make sure that we can get the producers their fair value and we can get the downstream players timely metal at cost effective ways and solutions. So these are some of the ways we're trying to advise. You know, I'll give the example of companies like Hindalco. We've got over 250 members of their team who are registered users on the platform, consuming our news and insights on a regular basis. We have Hindalco purchasing scrap through our platform. We've got Hindalco listing their surplus products on our platform from their factories. And we've also got them buying our industry reports to help with their strategic decision making. So we've got companies like Hindalco almost being an ecosystem partner to companies like Al Circle with their business decision making.
And that does sort of summarize and in that way comprehensively explains what we were actually talking about. But sir, apart from industry itself, Abhimanyu, we always talk about the principles that make up our very mindset. In one of our conversations with Mr. B.S. Nagesh, who was the pioneer of modern Indian retail and famously as known as the first employee of Shoppers Stop, he said that it is the mindset which defines the growth and the perspective of any individual taking on a journey. The right mindset, helps an individual to build, while the wrong one might actually sort of help. It would not let them reach the right point as they were had the potential to reach it. They would just spiral around. Now we were now as an individual had have been very grateful to have several of the conversations with Kamal Prakash sir, and he has always mentioned about his the spirit of charity, the spirit of doing better for others, and it has been sort of carried around, carried in your family's legacy in a way. So the some of the the most finest lessons that you would like to give anyone, uh, that you have taken out from your family's business legacy, and the lessons that you might have earned along the way, what are those?
Um, Thanks. If I think about it, I kind of go back to my first point that I mentioned, which was a people first approach. And I think that is one of those things, we're not rated as LinkedIn's great place to work or anything as yet, but we like to believe through our internal surveys that we do with our team that we are a great place to work. And what makes a great place to work is when you keep your team members and your people first and are empathetic towards their needs, towards their limitations and their situations, and mold the work environment around it. Of course, production, profitability, those are all very, very key factors in running a business, but we can't run it just by Kamal Prakash or Abhimanyu alone. It has to be run by a team. But having said that, of keeping people first, I think um, some of the other philosophies which have helped me kind of grow and enter into this legacy. This year is 126th year as a business officially, is the idea of what is sustainability, right? And sustainability for the environment and all of that is one thing, but I think it's about sustainability for the organization. And, there's so much to learn here from Japanese and German companies. And I've had the opportunity because we work a lot of with these international companies, is that these companies live beyond their founders. These companies live based on processes. They live based on systems. And I think those values are things that I try to bring to my work every single day. And I hope to kind of share them with my co-leaders at the organization who may be the ones carrying the organization forward. A simple way to remind ourselves about these company values is we've got them. All our conference rooms in the offices are named on our company values, which include things like trust, integrity, excellence, innovation, and sustainability, right? So these are some of the core values. And, you spoke about charity. And I think there's a concept which was inculcated in me very early on as a child, and this is probably greater than charity. It's contributing back to the community that gave you whatever you are today, right? I couldn't have been shaped in isolation in my home by my parents. I was shaped in the community I was born, whether it's my larger extended family and friends. I was shaped by the city of Calcutta. I was shaped by the country of India. And there are things which I need to do in my own right to contribute to these different ecosystems in my lifetime. And that can be through time, that can be through money, that can be through innovative ideas and solutions. And one of the ways that we do this very closely at the group is being associated by a few nonprofits. And I'll just share with all of you a little bit about the nonprofit which is closest to my heart. It's called Dakshini Prayas, which was an organization which was founded now about 33, 34 years ago. So I always joke that after having me, my parents didn't have another child, but they decided to have a non-profit. And so that non-profit, Dakshini Prayas, is like my younger sibling, which I feel a lot of love, affinity, and responsibility towards, where we're educating children. We're educating children not just for the sake of education, but to create the change makers of tomorrow. And which is why we put a lot of emphasis on the value system that I have gotten from my father, from my grandfather, that I'm able to inculcate in my daily life. And maybe those children coming from underprivileged communities don't have the luxury of bringing a lot of those values to the table because they're fighting to make two ends meet. So, how can the education system bring those values to them? You know, we run healthcare programs, we work with their mothers to give them income and livelihoods. So, we're trying to kind of create that model of, again, a sustainable community which can grow by itself. Um, and yeah, it is one of my most fun parts of my week is to spend time with Dakshini Prayas and kind of contribute the lessons that I learn while working at the JF Group and Al Circle and applying them to a more non-profit sector for their growth.
That's perfect, Abhimanyu. I think one aspects we all missing here, that we all learn that what you have and what are not. What are the main hindrances you have faced as a fifth generation entrepreneur? And what you can also say about the inefficiency in this value chain of the aluminium as well in India. That's the two
Okay.
question.
Okay. I'll start by answering your first one, Akash, which was hindrances as a fifth year um, fifth
Fifth generation.
generation uh, entrepreneur. I think I would call it hindrance and responsibility,
Mm.
right? Responsibility because it's a legacy. It's a legacy no matter how medium or small, but a legacy is a legacy, and how do you carry that on in its truest sense um, is a huge responsibility. And one of the things which is important is you need to grow it.
Yes.
Anything which stagnates in size can never sustain. It has to grow. So the responsibility is not just to keep the name
Yes.
alive. But I would say probably the challenges or things that we are working jointly. It's not just me, it's actually the whole ecosystem because I work not just with my father, but with my uncles and cousins and a large set of professionals who've been part of the organization for many, many decades. Is trying to bridge the gap between a traditional family run business to a professionally run organization. I think we've worked very well to professionalize several key aspects of our work. We've had great team members join the organization at leadership levels. But I think bringing that level of ownership down below is something that we constantly keep pushing back and forth with, right? And it's a situation where till you give that responsibility, you won't know whether people can take it or not. And I think it's one of those arguments that we have a lot, but I think I would like to believe that I've come out victorious in demonstrating a lot of key members of our team who have stepped up, taken responsibility, and shown that ownership can be at all levels. It does not need to be at the first level. The second thing was the concept of ESOPs. So at Al Circle, we're now starting to work on our ESOP policy and roll that out. And, a family business always believes that everything needs to be held and owned inside. You give out shares, you give out incentives, you give out bonuses, but the shares are held close to the chest. And I think we're challenging that and we're changing that mechanism where no, even family businesses for sustainability can have ESOPs because the more you share, the more you grow, the more owners you create for the business and take that forward. And I think the third is where do you deploy capital? Um, is a key conversation we often have, right? How much do you diversify versus how much do you consolidate and go down below? And I think that's a very generational mindset. I think our parents came from the generation of making sure invested in diverse portfolios to make sure that when there was a rainy day, uh, uh, they had the resources and stuff. And yes, there's a lot of merit in it, but I think our generation also believes in investing money where we understand what's happening with it, which may sometimes believe in going deeper into sectors rather than wider in terms of portfolio. And that's probably one of those pieces that we're still working on as a family to kind of navigate and understand the balance between the breadth and depth of our deployment of capital.
So with
I,
ownership, yeah, you were
sorry.
saying something, Manu.
No, I was going to go to Akash's second question, but if you have a follow
Yeah,
up
no,
on
no,
ownership,
please, please,
let's do
please.
that.
It's perfectly fine. We are holding a freewheeling. It's not something that.
No, I think, on a different tangent, Akash, sorry, you'll need to remind me of your second question.
Yes, there are the inefficiency in the value chain of aluminium as well in India. So
Mm.
yes, so while is getting the challenge from your own family business to making an air circle and then defining that inefficiency in those value chain, how you see that?
I think the inefficiencies question that you asked, Akash, about in the Indian aluminium ecosystem, again, are more than inefficiencies, they're just how the industry has developed. But I think whether you look at a large players or a small players, they're all working to iron out those
Mhm.
inefficiencies. When a country invests in a certain metal or a certain sector, it can't invest in everything from the get-go. It will only invest over time. And I think over there, companies like Hindalco are great examples of organizations which are trying to tap every aspect of the value chain, right? They started with primary production and they've gone all the way to downstream and recycling of aluminium as well, not only in India, but also through their global acquisitions of companies like Novelis. Um, when you look at companies like Vedanta, they are going through their demerger today to better allocate capital and assets to the businesses which need it in a timely fashion. And then you've got the downstream ecosystem, which is small but is starting to become very, very big and organized. India has over 250 medium sized aluminum extrusion companies, another 100 small size extrusion companies, and they weren't aggregated. But last year, a group of extruders came together and they created this association called Alumni, and now they started to bring these extruders together to not just help with technological improvements, sourcing efficiencies, but they're also working as a cohort, which is now working with government on policy frameworks to make it an advantageous industry for them, right? They are starting to work towards positioning India not just to the domestic players, but actually to the international players for more export. And they hold a great conference called Alumex, which started with only extrusions. But this year, they're expanding from extrusions to FRP product, recycling, and others as well. Right. So I think the formalization of this industry is probably one of the biggest things which has held itself back in the downstream sector. which is now starting to happen. I think these associations are doing a fantastic job of trying to formalize, understand the challenges, understand the pain points, and kind of highlight the best parts of it to the right stakeholders and advance the industry. If you go back to your introduction, you only spoke about the three big players, right? Hindalco, Vedanta, and Nalco. That's because we only think about the top of the pyramid, but aluminium in its raw form is of no use till it's used down the value chain. And I think the strengthening of that ecosystem is going to be important. The other side of this ecosystem where there's a lot of gap is recycling, because primary aluminum is limited in its capacity and it's very, very energy intensive. So, as I spoke about initially, aluminum can be recycled incessantly. And the production of recycled aluminum is starting to grow globally as well as in India. But our waste collection sorting systems are a huge hindrance to this. And this is not just for aluminium. I think our waste collection and segregation is a challenge just across the board, whether it be plastics or wet waste, dry waste, etc. And I think that's a big inefficiency that we need to solve as an industry. We need to come with other industry stakeholders, the plastics and the paper industries and the organic manure industries, and work with the government to set up better system. And there are some great non-profits doing work in a small way, like Garbage Free India, like Waste Warriors, which are setting up more strategic systems for recycling. You also have then larger players which are bringing in technology to kind of track recycling. Companies like Recycle with A, companies like Now Purchase, which are starting to formalize it. But I think in a country of 1.5 billion people, we still need to
Formal.
really formalize our segregation systems to collect more aluminium from the waste, which can then go into the recycling industry. And that's going to be a huge game changer, changing the trajectory of the Indian aluminium industry.
So, with the ownership and the digital transformation that is happening in the industrial ecosystems as of today, some of the point of inceptions that you have had personally in regard to the hardest trust barriers when convincing traditional industrial stakeholders to engage digitally.
So it's a challenge that we work on every single day, even today, Shrijan. So we've got 400,000 users from around the world using Al Circle every single month. That's close to 500,000 users. But I think the trust barrier is something that our account managers and our sales teams are kind of pushing on every single day. And that comes because we have been a traditional industry. Aluminium hasn't adopted digital tools as fast as many other sectors have. We're also globally fragmented as an industry. And we're too used to the idea of human beings meeting together, connecting, lots of rounds of discussion, negotiation before any kind of closing. And I think what Al Circle is trying to do is change that. And the first way we change that is through our content and our research to establish ourselves as a trusted player. Al Circle started several years ago just as a newsletter which used to go out to 100 people every day, till we started to build our own research and intelligence team and establish our thought leadership. Now, that is why we have 400,000 users today and over 50,000 registered users, because they trust the information that we bring to the table. And I think more than anything else, trust is the key factor in breaking that barrier. After that is seeing other companies starting to use the platform. So, whether it's the equipment providers who advertise on L Circle or the primary and secondary producers who buy our industry reports and give us testimonials. I think that's something we've been focusing on a lot. And we've got the large consulting companies like McKinsey and Bain buying our reports. as well as companies like Hindalco and global companies like Hydro and Rio Tinto buying our reports. So when you establish that kind of top of the industry players buying and subscribing to your reports and knowledge, it builds the trust down the value chain. And then third is the digital transparency, which our these B2B marketplace is bringing ahead, where you start to see companies plain and simple. You start to see their products, you start to see their product details, their production facilities, where are they located, and our teams are using manpower and technology to validate their business licenses and give them a verified tag, to make sure that we do their KYC, to make them trustable when you're buying a product from them. Our intermediary trade teams and our digital tools coming in to track every single document which is exchanged between a buyer and seller and automate that process, verify those documents, and keep them safely. So I think these are all the steps that we're trying to take to push this barrier of trust on a daily basis. I don't think we've still covered even half the aluminium industry, but we're pretty sure that over time, with more and more use cases and the trust tools and digital transparency that Al Circle is bringing in, will bring about dramatic change and shift in the way the industry operates.
So, in the way that AL Circle is doing a lot of progressive work and you are spearheading this change, if you were advising the government of India on, the industrial competitiveness, what three priorities would you recommend them for the next 10 years of the India's industrial future?
India's industrial future as a whole, that's a big kind of responsibility that you lay on me, Srijan. So I'll need a minute to think about it.
Sure, sir.
Okay, so I think thinking about three key things that the government of India needs to do to kind of inform the industrial growth of the nation over the next 10 years. I think number one is going to be education. Education at all levels, not just at the primary level, which the Indian government has tapped into a long way, but it has to grow at the middle school, the senior school, and the post school level. Whether it be vocational training, whether it be skill training or professional courses and academic infrastructure needed for that. We need to change the way our education system operates today to be a lot more application and a lot more industry based and focused. There's a mismatch that we're seeing between the skills that people are leaving their colleges with versus what the companies, industries, and factories are looking for. And I think bridging that gap is going to be one big fundamental towards India's future. And we can learn from a lot of global countries by one of the key pieces where academia and industry work hand in hand. And I think that doesn't happen as much in India. And I think we need to make that happen more and more. The minute we start doing that, this gap will start to shorten, and we will see more role and job appropriate graduates or professionals coming out of the system to be immediately employed, catapulting India's industrial economy to the next stage. The second piece is going to be to focus on sustainability and energy based businesses. Yes, we are a population which is still going to grow for the next few years. Consumption and other things are going to be heavy. But if we think about it, the fundamental which powers our lives today, and with more and more people moving to urban centers and with climate change, is energy and sustainability. And I was reading an article which said sustainability is good business. And I think that's where we need to think of that how can the government aid, invest, and catalyze more sustainability driven industries and businesses. And sustainable and industry does not mean factories. I think this is one thing I would like to clear. Agriculture is also an industry. Forestry is also an industry. And so we need to start thinking of industries as different from just these industrial hubs to more like industries across the globe, whether they are across the country, whether they are cottage industries, whether they're industries around our natural resources, or whether they be producing high value goods in factories. So I would say sustainability is going to be key. And I think the third piece that will be very, very important to kind of catalyze this, and here I'm going to make a plug for uh, aluminium, particularly, and Al Circle, is to create the right infrastructure, both financial, but also from a perspective of the laws, tax regimes, uh, and raw materials and others is to power aluminium, because aluminium powers four of the key sectors that support any economy. Aluminium powers building and construction, aluminium powers energy, aluminium powers transportation of all kinds, rail, car, bikes, etc. And it powers FMCG products. These are four key pillars to India's economy. We know that. And I think by supporting aluminium, you already start to support these four industries in a lot of different ways. And we at Al Circle have a lot of knowledge and information around this with our users to kind of bring to the forefront what are some of the areas which need to be worked upon.
That's perfect, Abhimanyu. Just from your first point, I want to ask a question that yes, India needs to have a good education system which bridges the gap between the skill of industry demanding and what the student come from. Do you think like if it been inculcated from the school level as well, that's from the above sixth class? Do you think that it will be still be a good part, because in India many of the industry come from a traditional business, and if a school going or a starting college going boy comes toward this facing industry, we may have a formal education system and a formal system of industry as well in the near future.
So, correct me, Akash, if I got your question correctly. I feel I might have missed that. Um, but I think what is important to understand over here is skills. I think we are missing the gap when we say education. What does education mean? Education today has become just about a curriculum
Very
which
good.
needs to be completed. We're not assessing people on the skills they leave it with or the value system they leave it with, right? And I think that is something that we need to work towards. I'm not going to focus on the value system part of it because I know we're talking about employability a lot more in industrialization. And I think it's the skills. Now, whether it's the skills, are they leaving with the skill for critical thinking, which can make them do strategic or decision making jobs? Are they doing with the skills of innovation and engineering, where they can work in industrial settings and create, innovate, and ideate new pieces and new solutions? Are they leaving with the critical thinking of connecting the dots, understanding ecology, understanding food systems so that they can work in agriculture? No, we're not. We've all come out of that education system, and it is our other resources which gives us the skills, not our traditional education system. And I think when industry and education institutions start to work together, the skill based learning automatically starts to come to the table and make them a lot more fit for the professional world thereafter.
So
sir.
one of our audience base also, in along with the young generation entrepreneurs, but also includes the MBA grads across the public university framework. Now we all know that most of these institutions across the public universities in India are sort of largely removed from the industrial outreach and do not really align to the industry's current norms. So as a CEO of a leading company like AL Circle, what sort of advice would you give to these, new bucks entering into the market? What sort of mindset they should have, and what sort of industry they should target? And if someone wants to join your company, what they must do to, make that?
So I'll dismiss one thing, Srijan, to begin with, is I don't think industry should be a focus. That this because the Indian economy is at a place today where all our industries are going to grow. So I think choose an industry that you find an interest and passion in. And I think that interest and passion is so important today because that will push you to put in your 100% and more at work every day. So I would be suggesting be sector agnostic because today every single industry needs different people. If you think about it, designers are no longer only working in design companies. Designers are also being hired by technology companies today. They're also being hired by product companies to design products today. Engineers are being hired by data companies.
Yes.
Mathematicians are being hired by banks. So I, I just feel this whole idea that, oh, I should only pursue a career in this industry should be dismissed. Number two, I think be digital first. Don't let yourself get outpaced by technology. Embrace technology. Because that is something which I ask everyone in my team when I'm hiring now is what are some of the digital tools that you feel comfortable with? How do you leverage digital tools to increase your productivity? How do you use it to inform your work and your decision making today? So I think leveraging technology is going to be very, very critical in your work. And this can be for office based desk jobs or it can be for factories because today even factories are starting to deploy a lot more digital systems at every step of the way, whether it is from tracking to dispatching. And the last thing that I look for when I hire at Al Circle today is people skills. With phones and gadgets, we all are losing our attention spans and we're starting to get so individualistic and solo in our approach that we're losing the key skills of human interaction. We're constantly behaving in ways that we've not seen before. People have shorter reaction times. People don't understand what it truly means to collaborate with each other at times. And a lot of this is because of being sucked into these kind of digital platforms and tools. And I think interpersonal skills is something I look for, which can only and only be mastered through interacting with other human beings, not interacting with devices. And I think that is something as we're hiring the new young people in our organization at Al Circle, we look for.
So as we move towards the end of our session today, this is something we would like to say that season two of BizTalks, has explored leadership, purpose, institutions, transformations, and now entrepreneurship. If there is one idea or one, thought you would like the young India to carry forward from this session today, what would it be? Something that you would like to leave behind.
I think conscious entrepreneurship. It's something which I learned about recently at a session I attended by a gentleman named Samir Kamboj. And he spoke about this, making conscious decision making. So, why are you studying something? Are you studying something because Sharma ji ka beta bhi is studying that, or you studying because you want to study that? Are you taking that job because all your friends have got MNC jobs, or do you want to take that job, or would you rather be happier working in a small startup? Would you be rather happier working in a non-profit organization? Would you rather be happier starting an entrepreneurship journey? When you're becoming an entrepreneur or joining a job, why are you going to work every day? I think that consciousness of making choices in your life is going to be that one takeaway that I would request everyone listening to this. It's something I try, not that I've succeeded 100%. I do think I still make decisions because others around me are making those decisions. But it is something that I'm trying to work towards, to be conscious about why I choose to do what I choose to do, what will be the impacts of what I'm choosing to do, and eventually will it make me happy? Because if I'm happy, I will continue to do it and make others happy in the process.
So I can say that I sort of relate with that idea as well, because uh, although I won't say that I'm an entrepreneur or a startup founder, but while I was doing my MBA and I did my prior degrees in finance, now finance became sort of a sort of a mindset in the mindset that how I look at things and how I evolve. But at the same time, found that there is something that I lack solely, and that is perspective. Now, perspective arises, that's how I felt, that maybe it arises by the experiences I acquire, perhaps the years and years of wisdom. And to get all of that would require a significant amount of time. Yes, I am willing to spend that time, but if I get to have something earlier, I don't mind that as well. And sort of the INR's idea came into picture that, we there are so many individuals out there, and they have their specific industry setup, they have their lives that they have lived in a particular line of field. And wouldn't it be better to have conversations with them and try to get some of that perspective, sort of humanize it uh, to my level, and then perhaps sort of adapt it, or extend it outward. So
So,
yeah.
sorry, please.
No, no, you were saying. It's okay.
No, I think one of the things, Srijan, you spoke about is it takes years to get perspective. While I partially agree to the school of thought that with age comes experience and wisdom and perspective, I do feel as a young person myself, often challenging the perspective of the elders around me. And when I see my younger generation, my nephews, nieces doing that for me, even people at work, I have come to believe that perspective actually is not a fixed thing in time. Perspective constantly changes, and perspective is based on your experience so far. So there's not to say the perspective of a 50-year-old is better than the perspective of a 25-year-old, because for that 25-year-old, that perspective is what matters. And I think we need to negate this notion that perspective only comes with age. Experience does come with age, but I think perspective can come earlier. And here, with all the different digital tools at our disposal and digital media and channels, I think we've got access to finding perspective definitely much quicker than our previous generations did.
Thank you, Abhimanyu. Season 2 began with a pioneer who helped shape modern Indian retail. Now it concludes with an entrepreneur helping shape the future of industrial ecosystems. Perhaps one can say that the next chapter of India's growth story will not be written only by those creating new industries, but by those who deeply understand existing ones and transform them for a new era. And in many ways, that may be the quiet lesson of this session itself. Thank you so much, Abhimanyu, for speaking with us. It has been an absolute pleasure. And thank you again for sparing time.
Thanks so much, Srijan and Akash, and good luck. It was a pleasure to be invited and a great chat with both of you. Thank you.
Hello there. Welcome viewers to